Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Hello? Hello? Hello? Hello?
Chucky from Child's Play, Freddy from Nightmare on Elm Street, Michael Myers from Halloween, Pinhead from Hellraiser. These villainous faces represent their respective horror franchises, not unlike how Ghostface represents the Scream series. But what makes the latter different from the others is that Ghostface is several different people. Consequently, the Scream franchise is represented by its heroes instead of its villain, mainly Sidney Prescott, played by Neve Campbell. In 1996, at the time of Scream's initial release, Drew Barrymore was the biggest star to appear in the film. It was her face that dominated much of the promotional material. So, viewers were shocked when Barrymore's character, Casey Becker, was revealed to be a false protagonist, having been callously slaughtered in the film's 12-minute opening scene. With this in mind, the Scream films have largely been an ensemble effort, particularly with Gale Weathers and Dewey Riley acting as secondary protagonists alongside Sidney. With a horror movie being less about the monster stalking and picking off his prey of disposable characters, to instead being about how people are impacted by a heinous killing spree. This approach really helped flesh out both suspects and victims, more so than other films of its genre. If you think I'm giving Scream too much credit, just look at our main character, Sidney. Throughout the entire series, Sidney constantly copes with the murder of her mother, Maureen. Yet the tragedy forces her to sharpen her survival skills and fight back, making her more of a badass than a Scream Queen, actually. In Scream, death has a consequence, a cause and effect. Similarly, Gale's willingness to be hated has allowed her to face the evils of this world instead of running away from it. She opted to go back to the Mocker residence for the showdown after escaping from the crashed news van. Her return to help Sidney, who was always at odds with her, was not only something Gale didn't have to do, but it also demonstrated growth in her character. There are similar examples of this throughout these films, and it not only helped make the non-villainous characters more colorful than your typical horror flick, but it also added touches of realism to these characters. This isn't limited to Dewey, Sidney, and Gale, but also supporting characters.
And I said, can I please say mom before the final thing? Because I really was dedicated to the fact that I didn't want Tatum to be a disposable blonde with big boobs, whatever, on screen that would just, be another kill. I wanted people to be like feel like their friend was gone and someone that they had empathy for, and that's something that's very lacking in a lot of horror films. You don't generally care.
In scary movies, characters with smaller roles just seem to be there to die. But every now and again, there's a supporting character that is so charming, it is worth stepping back and appreciating what a rarity they are. Certainly, every Scream fan has their own favorite character for their own personal reasons, and there's a lot to choose from. But there's one in particular that is so beloved, it's pretty much sacrilege to say you don't like them. We are, of course, talking about everybody's favorite movie geek, Randy Meeks. If the Scream series had to select a fourth main character, Randy would undisputably fill that spot. Along with Cotton Weary, Randy appears in the first 3 films of the series. For Cotton Weary, having had an affair with Maureen, whose murder set everything into motion, the former death row inmate's purpose in the first and third film is mostly a device to flesh out the history of the Scream universe, with Cotton only really being brought to the forefront in Scream 2, whereas Randy was always in the crossfire of the first and second movies. What's interesting is that Randy doesn't become heavily involved in the story for the first film until about halfway through, and he's no longer part of the story in the second half of Scream 2. Thus, when you're watching the films, Randy seems brushed aside, but when reflecting upon and replaying these movies, his impact becomes apparent, and there's no question why he's one of the franchise's most popular characters. Randy's only featured once in the first act of Scream, at the fountain where the audience is also introduced to Stu Macher. Stu is the boyfriend of Tatum, Sidney's best friend, who we had already met earlier. Billy is also present, making the group in this scene a quintet, and it's very apparent right from the get-go that Randy is the odd man out. Throughout the rest of the film, Randy ends up as the runt. In the video store scene, he's ganged up on by Billy and Stu. At the party, he's ditched, left alone with his beloved movies. Fast forward to Scream 2, Randy is brushed aside by Derek, and left alone to die by Gail and Dewey.
Just keep him on the phone.
What do you want me to say?
I don't know. Just keep him talking. Come on, Gail.
In the original screenplay, Kevin Williamson describes Randy as the fifth wheel. This is the same description given during Randy's casting call, as revealed by Jamie Kennedy himself.
And I'm looking for roles, and I'm like, oh, this is that. Oh, shit. And it says Randy, the gangly fifth wheel.
Unlike the rest of the characters present in this scene, Randy isn't seen again for over another 30 minutes. It's during his conversation at the video store that Randy truly demonstrates his understanding from movies, which no doubt assists him in becoming a survivor of Scream 1 at least. In this scene, Randy not only answers a customer's question regarding Joe Dante's 1981 werewolf classic, The Howling, without missing a beat.
What's that werewolf movie with E.T.'s mom in it?
The Howling, horror, straight ahead.
But he also details his theories about the current killing spree going on in Woodsboro, specifically how the prime suspect, Neil Prescott, Sidney's father, is simply just a red herring, and the individual on Randy's radar is Billy Loomis. Randy's indeed correct that Neil is just a red herring and not the killer.
I'm telling you, the dad's a red herring. It's Billy.
Perhaps what's even more noteworthy is that Billy is the second person Randy accuses of being a killer. The other, Stu.
Are the police aware that you dated the victim?
What are you saying? That I killed her?
It would certainly improve your high school kill.
Stu was with me last night, okay?
Was that before or after he
Sliced and diced.
Something similar occurs in Scream 2 when Randy points out that Derek, Hallie, or Mickey could be the killers. The former two were actually supposed to be the killers in the initial draft, while the latter ended up being the killer in the final cut. In the same conversation, Randy also makes reference to Jason's mother, Mrs. Voorhees, the killer from Friday the 13th, a character that Debbie Salt was modeled after.
Mrs. Voorhees was a terrific serial killer.
In Scream 3, Randy references The Return of the Jedi and The Godfather Part 3.
Godfather, Jedi.
Sidney's journey of coming to terms with her mother's secret life parallels Luke Skywalker and Mary Corleone facing the sins of their fathers. Even beyond the grave, Randy is using his knowledge of movies to draw parallels to a killing spree that's taking place after his death. These subtle clues of Randy guessing the ending gives him a lot of credibility in the fandom. He's essentially a proxy for the viewer. Most of the fans of Scream, who tend to be horror buffs, if not cinephiles, can relate to Randy for his passion of film. To general audiences, Randy is thought of as the rules guy, and the self-awareness of his surroundings allows for the traditional viewer to suspend disbelief a little more than usual, because Randy is already one step ahead of them when it comes to pointing things out. With all this being said, Randy is not without his blinders. He is particularly prone to being snuck up on. From Billy confronting him at the video store, to Billy's mother in the sequel, where Randy meets his demise, and let's not forget the "Behind You, Jamie" scene. Randy still manages to find himself in danger despite his wisdom. However, in spite of these imperfections and weaknesses, it actually makes Randy more relatable. In fact, he might even be a more impactful character having died, since it showed him as a vulnerable, flesh and blood human being. Just think, had Randy survived Scream 2, knowing everything about movies, explaining all the rules on how to survive, guessing the killer's identities correctly, this invincibility would have made him cartoonish. In a strange way, death made Randy an even more credible and likable character.
You know, when you go to these conventions, there are like super cinephiles. And, you know, I mean, I will say, like, top 3 things of my whole career is, why did you die? Why did you die? I mean, it's a big deal. I know we're not supposed to talk about us, but a guy explained it perfectly. He goes, Scream would not have the impact it would if I didn't die, you know?
Kill your darlings.
You got to, exactly. Just like Drew. When
darlings.
Drew went out,
That's the brilliance of the opening sequence.
it's the brilliance of it.
That's not to say Randy's death didn't come without criticism. In the Scream 2 commentary, which features Wes Craven, it was acknowledged that many fans were upset when Randy was killed off. And in the Scream 3 commentary, it was mentioned that they toyed with the idea of somehow bringing Randy back, having actually survived the second installment, with his family whisking him away to safety. Jamie Kennedy had even pushed for bringing Randy back in Scream 4 via Twitter, saying, "Randy Meeks lives." More recently, Kennedy proposed ideas on how they might bring several characters back.
Would you want to do something with Scream? Is that part over?
I would like to, if the movies keep going.
Yeah.
I think there's a way to do it that they can bring back some of their favorite characters.
You have an idea?
I do, and we've talked about it because these horror conventions are bigger than ever.
Yeah.
And so when I go, I talk to different people about it.
All these ideas eventually find their way into the trash bin, never getting off the ground, either for being too unrealistic or cheapening Scream 2. Kevin Williamson, for example, stands by keeping Randy dead. I would love nothing more than to have Jamie Kennedy in the film. However, to have Randy in the film, it sort of just takes it. I mean, Scream 2 was a lie, you know? It's a false move. So I just won't do it. I can't do that. I just won't do it. For the most part, fans recognize Randy's death as a necessary evil to keep the stakes of the slasher series high, and as a means to avoid letting plot armor creep into the franchise. Others, however, maintain criticism of killing off Randy. In the book, Wes Craven, The Art of Horror, John Kenneth Muir writes that Randy was the unquestioned mouthpiece of the saga, and killing him was a bad call. At the time of Scream 2, Wes and Kevin were likely unaware of viewers' fondness for Randy. Scream 1 was an unexpected hit, and they were striking while the iron was still hot, swiftly moving into production of Scream 2. They probably didn't even stop to realize they had a fan base who'd have such a strong opinion if they killed off a survivor. Jamie Kennedy mentions in his series, How I Got Cast, that he wasn't even sure they were going to bring Randy back for the second movie, despite having survived the first one.
You're not always guaranteed to be in the sequel.
Knowing this, it seems likely that the creative choice to kill off Randy wasn't considered a risk until the damage had already been done. There was pressure to kill at least one survivor from the first movie, and between David Arquette, Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, and Jamie Kennedy, the latter had the least star power. Of the four, Randy was the little guy, but when he was gone, it was very apparent that something was missing. A link between the movie and the audience had been broken the moment Randy died. A bit of backpedaling in the subsequent films can be seen as a result of his absence, suggesting that had Wes and Kevin known fans loved Randy, Randy might have actually been spared. Before we continue to the final part of this video, if you enjoy what you're seeing here, please make sure to check out my other Scream videos. And if you want to be notified when I release more Scream content, then please remember to like, subscribe, ring the bell, and spread the love. There's more Scream content to come, but if you want me to do another character study of one of your favorites, please let me know in the comments below. Watch Mojo ranked Randy Meeks number 3 on their list of top 10 movie characters who surprisingly survived. Having been tucked away in only one scene of the first act of the film, Randy would seem like an unusual choice to spare in a slasher. Kennedy even wonders if Randy was originally supposed to die, since he's knocked out for such a long time after Billy shoots him.
I kind of think I was supposed to die. I think it was a rewrite. I'm not sure because I was shot and then I eventually came back. But I was out of the picture for a while she was going to kill people. And then I popped up and I was like, oh.
It's worth noting that aside from Kennedy's speculation, there's no other indication that Randy was originally supposed to die in Scream 1. In fact, the original script actually paints Randy as a leading man, and he did get the girl, two elements which are mocked in Scream 2. In the original draft of Scream 1, Randy was supposed to ask Sidney out to a movie when he's helping her untie Neil. She answers, "Only if it's a nice Meg Ryan movie." After Billy was revealed to be a psychopathic killer, Randy basically turned into Sidney's love interest. In the final cut, aside from Randy having a crush on Sidney, none of this exists. It's unclear why some of this was changed for the final movie. Perhaps Wes and/or Kevin thought Randy asking Sidney out after they just barely survived a massacre was unrealistic and/or didn't come across as romantic on screen as it did on paper. At the time, Jamie Kennedy was an unknown while everyone else had been in the industry for a few years. Casting for Randy was very competitive, but ultimately, all those in charge felt that Kennedy was perfect for the part, and everyone really pushed for him to get the role.
At the time, I was just a very struggling actor, and I said, I gotta get in for this movie.
It was just one of those moments where we'd seen a lot of people for this role for Randy, and we just didn't know where we were going.
And I get a call from my agent. She goes, hey, it's not bad.
It was between him and Breckenmeyer, but just, you know, it's just that certain something that got him the part instead of Breckenmeyer.
It's possible that even though Kennedy was their vision of a perfect Randy, maybe there just wasn't romantic chemistry between Campbell and Kennedy, so this bit was dropped. Scream was always envisioned by Williamson as a trilogy, and the first installment was to have Sidney, Gale, and Randy survive. It's hard to say that if Craven had not made the last-minute change to include Dewey surviving also, would Wes and Kevin have shown mercy on Randy in Scream 2? And if so, what would he be doing if he had survived the Windsor College murders? In the original draft of Scream 2, Randy was Gale's cameraman. This way of involving Randy in the sequel was dropped, and he instead went to college with Sidney, where he studied film, including the class Scary Movies 101. It seems like Williamson's original trilogy was always planned to have Scream 2 set at a university, an homage to college-themed slasher films, whereas Scream 3 was always meant to revolve around the world of Stab in some form or another. Between working at a video store, studying film at college, leaving behind a posthumous video of himself, and living the events of Stab, it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to assume that Randy probably would have found his way into the involvement of Stab's productions. Because Randy had been working with Gale in the original Scream 2 script as her cameraman, the Gale and Randy collaboration was indeed an idea Williamson kicked around and perhaps would have been explored more had Randy survived. Maybe Randy would have helped Gale bring her vision to life in a more tasteful way, from helping her behind the camera to sitting in the director's chair and bringing his own story to life in a movie. This isn't too far off from what Sidney does in Scream 4 with her autobiography. She basically does what Gale had been doing for years, but far more tactfully. So, had Randy survived Scream 2, this would be a plausible direction to take his story. And as a director of his own movie, he could cast an A-lister to play him instead of a Dr. Quinn extra.
At least you get David Schwimmer. I get the guy who drove Jane Seymour's stagecoach for one episode of Dr. Quinn.
Randy Meeks remains one of Kennedy's most memorable roles, even though much of Kennedy's other work was more comedy-focused, some of which earned him Razzie nominations. From Scream fans to horror fans, from your snobby movie critic to your Joe Blow popcorn muncher, Jamie Kennedy will always be remembered fondly as the shit-talking, hush-puppy-wearing, video store clerking, Jamie Lee Curtis obsessing, movie geek, Randy Meeks, horror's best supporting character.